I found out about my grandmother's death from a stranger's LinkedIn post, not a phone call, not a text, not even a cold, formal email. A LinkedIn post from someone I'd never met, expressing condolences to my cousin Derek about the recent loss of your beloved grandmother. The timestamp was read 3 days ago. I'd love to know which corner of the globe you're watching from. And if this story speaks to you, make sure to subscribe. Tomorrow's video is one you absolutely can't miss. My hands trembled as I stared at my phone screen in the cramped break room of the nonprofit where I worked in Portland. The fluorescent lights buzzed overhead, casting everything in that sickly yellow glow that makes even good news feel ominous. But this wasn't good news. This was the kind of news that splits your world in half, before you knew and after. Grandma Rose was dead, had been dead for 3 days, and nobody in my family thought to tell me. I scrolled frantically through my phone, checking missed calls, text messages, voicemails, nothing. My mother's last text was from 2 weeks ago, asking if I'd sent Derek's graduation gift yet. My brother Marcus hadn't contacted me in over a month. My sister Bethany's Instagram was full of her usual workout videos and smoothie recipes, posted just this morning. No black clothes, no grief, no indication that the woman who raised us all had passed away. The LinkedIn stranger had included details that made my chest tight. The service was beautiful. Rose would have been so proud to see how the whole family came together. Posted yesterday. The funeral had already happened. They'd buried her while I was sitting in budget meetings and answering donor calls, completely oblivious that the most important person in my life was being lowered into the ground without me. I tried calling my mother first. Patricia Campbell, real estate mogul, always too busy for long conversations, but never too busy to tell you exactly what you were doing wrong with your life. The phone rang 4 times before going to voicemail. Her crisp, professional voice: "You've reached Patricia Campbell with Mountain View Properties. Leave a detailed message, and I'll return your call within 24 hours. I hung up without speaking. What was I supposed to say? "Hi, Mom, just wondering why nobody told me Grandma died." Next, I tried Marcus, my younger brother, the golden child who could do no wrong despite never holding a job for more than 6 months. Straight to voicemail. His was more casual. "Hey, it's Marcus. You know what to do. Beep." This time I left a message, my voice barely steady. "Marcus, it's Sarah. I just found out about Grandma Rose. Call me back, please." Bethany didn't even answer. My little sister, the Instagram influencer, with 200,000 followers, who documented every meal, every workout, every inspirational quote that crossed her path. She was probably busy staging content for tomorrow's Mindful Monday post, completely unaware that her sister was falling apart in a corporate break room. I sat there for 20 minutes, staring at my phone, waiting for it to ring, waiting for someone to call and explain, waiting for someone to say it was all a mistake, that they'd tried to reach me but my number had changed, that there was some reasonable explanation for why I'd been left out of the most important goodbye of my life. The phone stayed silent. Instead, I did what I'd learned to do over the years when my family forgot I existed. I took action myself. I called the funeral home listed in the LinkedIn post's comments. Henderson and Sons Funeral Services in Bakersfield, California. The receptionist who answered had that practiced, gentle voice that funeral homes train their staff to use. "Henderson and Sons, this is Michelle. How may I help you?" "Hi, I'm calling about Rose Campbell's service. She was my grandmother, and My voice cracked. I took a breath. I wasn't able to attend, and I wanted to get some information. "Oh, of course, dear. I'm so sorry for your loss. Mrs. Campbell's service was yesterday morning. It was lovely. Standing room only. The family did such a beautiful job with the arrangements. Standing room only. People I'd never met had been there to say goodbye while I was completely unaware she was even gone. Can you tell me, was there a particular reason for the quick timeline? 3 days seems very fast." Michelle's voice became more cautious. "Well, the family mentioned they wanted to keep things small and immediate. Just close family and a few friends. They handled all the arrangements through your mother, Patricia, I believe. Lovely woman, very organized. Close family. I was her granddaughter. I'd spent every summer at Rose's house from age 7 to 17. I'd held her hand through 2 surgeries. I'd driven 14 hours straight when she had pneumonia last year, because nobody else in the family could be bothered to check on her. But apparently I wasn't close to my family. Did anyone ask about other family members who might not have been contacted? Oh honey, I wouldn't know about that. The family seemed to have everything well coordinated. Your cousin Derek handled most of the details with your mother. Such a thoughtful young man. Derek, my cousin who lived 2 hours away from Grandma Rose and visited maybe twice a year. Derek who'd borrowed money from her for his business ventures and always forgot to pay it back. Derek who'd been too busy to help when she needed her bathroom renovated for safety but somehow had time to plan her entire funeral. After I hung up, I sat in my car in the nonprofit's parking lot, rain pattering against the windshield. Portland's October drizzle matched my mood perfectly. I called Grandma Rose's house, knowing it was pointless but needing to try. Maybe she'd answer. Maybe this was all some horrible misunderstanding. The phone rang and rang before an automated message picked up. The number you have dialed is no longer in service. They'd already disconnected her phone. 3 days after her death, they'd already started erasing her from the world. I drove home to my small apartment, my mind racing. How had this happened? How had my own family managed to plan and execute an entire funeral without including me? It wasn't like I lived across the country. Portland to Bakersfield was a 7-hour drive. I could have been there. But more than that, how had they decided I didn't deserve to know? What conversation had taken place where someone said my name and everyone else agreed I should be left out? Had they discussed it at all? Or had they simply forgotten I existed? In my apartment, I opened my laptop and started searching. Rose Campbell obituary Bakersfield. It popped up immediately on the local newspaper's website. A beautiful photo of Grandma Rose from maybe 20 years ago, smiling in her garden. The obituary was thorough, listing her volunteer work at the animal shelter, her 40-year membership at St. Mark's Presbyterian, her love of mystery novels and crossword puzzles. At the bottom, the survivor section made my stomach drop. Rose is survived by her daughter Patricia Campbell, her grandchildren Derek Campbell, Marcus Campbell, and Bethany Campbell, and numerous friends who will miss her dearly. I read it 3 times, each time hoping I'd missed my name somehow, but no. Sarah Campbell, the granddaughter who'd spent countless hours listening to Rose's stories about growing up during the Depression, who'd learned to knit from her arthritic hands, who'd been the only one to visit during the pandemic when everyone else was too worried about exposure. Sarah Campbell didn't exist in the official record of Rose Campbell's life. That night, I couldn't sleep. I kept checking my phone, still hoping someone would call with an explanation. Maybe they'd realized their mistake. Maybe they were planning a second service and would invite me to that. Maybe someone would at least apologize. But as the hours ticked by, the silence became more deafening than any words could have been. My family hadn't forgotten to tell me about Grandma Rose's death. They'd chosen not to tell me. They'd made a conscious decision that I didn't belong at her funeral, didn't deserve to say goodbye, didn't matter enough to include in their grief. The worst part wasn't even the exclusion, it was the efficiency of it. The careful coordination required to plan an entire funeral while ensuring I never found out. Someone had to have had my contact information. They'd reached out when they needed things from me before. Someone had to have thought about whether to call me and decided against it. This wasn't neglect, this was intentional. As dawn broke over Portland, painting my apartment walls in pale gray light, I realized I was about to learn just how much my family had underestimated who I'd become in the years since I'd left California. They thought I was still the quiet, accommodating Sarah who would accept whatever scraps of attention they threw my way. They had no idea what they'd just unleashed. The first text came at 6:47 a.m., 2 days after I'd discovered the truth. Not an apology, not an explanation, just 4 words from my mother. We need to talk. I stared at those words while my coffee grew cold. After 48 hours of complete silence, this was how Patricia Campbell chose to break it. No acknowledgement of what they'd done. No recognition that they'd excluded me from the most important moment of our family's recent history. Just a demand disguised as a suggestion. I didn't respond immediately. Instead, I did something I hadn't done in years. I started making a list. Not a grocery list or a work task list, but a timeline of every major family event I'd been excluded from, minimized in, or manipulated around. The pattern I'd been too close to see while living it became crystal clear when laid out chronologically. It started small. My high school graduation, 2016. I'd earned a full scholarship to Portland State University for International Relations, something I'd worked toward for 4 years. The family dinner afterward wasn't about my achievement. It was about Derek's acceptance to community college, and how proud everyone was that he was, quote, finally finding his direction. My scholarship warranted exactly one comment from my mother. Well, at least someone's paying for it. Marcus's graduation 2 years later was a 3-day celebration. Rented hall, catered food. Relatives flying in from 3 states. His degree was in general studies with a 2.1 GPA, but he was the son, the heir apparent to whatever legacy Patricia Campbell imagined she was building. Then there was Bethany's wedding in 2019. I'd driven down from Portland, took 3 days off work, bought a bridesmaid dress in the color she'd specified. 2 weeks before the ceremony, she called to tell me the wedding party was getting too big, and I was being moved to a regular guest. The replacement bridesmaid? Derek's girlfriend, who'd been dating him for exactly 2 months. A lot of love and effort went into bringing this story to life. If you're enjoying it, we'd be so grateful if you'd subscribe to our channel. Now, back to where we left off. But the pattern went deeper than just celebrations. It was in the everyday exclusions that I'd trained myself not to notice. Family group chats that I was mysteriously never added to. Holiday plans were discussed and finalized before anyone mentioned them to me. Investment opportunities that Patricia shared with Marcus and Derek but never brought up when I was around. When Grandma Rose had her first heart attack in 2020, I found out from a neighbor who assumed I already knew. By the time I got to the hospital, the family meeting with the cardiologist was over. The decisions about her care had been made. My input wasn't needed, even though I was the one who'd researched heart specialists and knew her medical history better than anyone. The list grew longer as memories surfaced. Each incident, viewed individually, could be explained away. Family oversight, poor communication, busy schedules. But together they formed a clear picture of systematic exclusion. I wasn't forgotten. I was deliberately kept on the periphery. My phone buzzed again. This time it was Marcus, finally returning my call from 2 days earlier. His text was casual, almost flippant. Hey sis, heard you were trying to reach me. Everything okay? Everything is okay. As if I might be calling about weekend plans or borrowing money. As if our grandmother hadn't been buried without my knowledge. I called him back immediately. He answered on the 4th ring, and I could hear video game sounds in the background. Sarah, what's up? Mom said you were being dramatic about something. Dramatic. That word had followed me through childhood, anytime I'd tried to express hurt or disappointment. Sarah's being dramatic again. It was their catch-all dismissal for any emotion I showed that made them uncomfortable. Marcus, Grandma Rose died. You buried her yesterday. And nobody told me. The video game sound stopped. There was a long pause before he spoke, and when he did, his voice had lost its casual tone. Oh, yeah, that. Look, Sarah, it happened really fast. She had another heart attack on Tuesday night, and by Wednesday morning she was gone. The doctor said she wouldn't have wanted to be kept alive artificially, so we had to make decisions quickly. Tuesday night. I'd been in a board meeting for the nonprofit, discussing our upcoming fundraiser for refugee families. While I was planning ways to help strangers rebuild their lives, my own grandmother was dying, and my family was planning her funeral without me. The funeral was Thursday, Marcus. You had 2 full days to call me. Bakersfield is 7 hours from Portland. I could have been there. I know. But Mom handled all the arrangements, and honestly, we figured you were probably too busy with your job and everything. You've seemed pretty distant lately. Distant, there was that word again. It was their favorite accusation, the one they pulled out whenever they wanted to justify their exclusions. Sarah's distant. Sarah doesn't really want to be involved. Sarah's too focused on her career. I visited Grandma Rose 3 times this year, Marcus. More than you, Bethany, and Derek combined. How is that distant? Another pause. In the background, I could hear someone calling his name. Probably his latest girlfriend, wondering why he was on a serious phone call. Look, Sarah, I'm sorry you're upset, but it's done now. Grandma Rose is at peace, and that's what matters. We can't change what happened. The ease with which he dismissed it stunned me. Not, we made a mistake. Not, we should have called you. Just, it's done now. As if my exclusion was an inevitable natural disaster, rather than a conscious choice made by multiple people. Who made the decision not to tell me? It wasn't like that. It wasn't a decision. Things just moved fast, and someone had to create a contact list for the funeral home. Someone had to decide which relatives to call. Someone wrote the obituary and chose which names to include. At what point in that process did anyone think about me? I could hear him getting frustrated, the way he always did when pressed for specifics. Marcus had never been good with details or accountability. I don't know, Sarah. Mom coordinated everything. You should talk to her if you want answers. I'm talking to you. You're my brother. You were there when these decisions were made. I want to know what was said about me. The silence stretched longer this time. When Marcus finally spoke, his voice was quieter, almost guilty. Derek mentioned that you'd been kind of political lately, with your job and everything. He thought maybe having you at the service might create tension. Political. Because I worked for a nonprofit that helped refugees resettle in America. Because I'd spoken up at family dinners when Derek made disparaging comments about immigrants. Because I'd refused to laugh along when Patricia made jokes about bleeding heart liberals whenever my work came up in conversation. So you excluded me from our grandmother's funeral because Derek thinks my job is too political? It wasn't just Derek. Who else? Another pause. I could hear him struggling, probably realizing for the first time how indefensible their reasoning sounded when spoken aloud. Mom agreed that family gatherings have been tense lately. She thought maybe it would be better to keep things simple, just immediate family. I am immediate family, Marcus. I'm her granddaughter. I know, but... There's no but. Either I'm family or I'm not. And apparently you've all decided I'm not. That's not fair, Sarah. You're the one who moved away. You're the one who stopped coming to things regularly. You can't just show up when someone dies and expect. Expect what? Expect to be told when my grandmother dies? Expect to be allowed to say goodbye? Those are pretty basic expectations, Marcus. I could hear him getting defensive, the way he always did when confronted with uncomfortable truths. This was the Marcus I remembered from childhood, quick to anger when his decisions were questioned, even quicker to deflect blame onto others. You know what, Sarah? This is exactly why we didn't call. This attitude right here. Everything has to be about you. Grandma Rose is dead, and instead of grieving like the rest of us, you're turning it into some big drama about your feelings. And there it was. The core of their justification. My hurt at being excluded was more problematic than the exclusion itself. My pain was an inconvenience to their grief. My desire to say goodbye to the woman who'd raised me was selfish and dramatic. I'm hanging up now, Marcus. But I want you to remember this conversation. I want you to remember that when I needed my family most, you chose to protect your comfort over including me. And I want you to think about what Grandma Rose would say if she knew what you all did. I ended the call before he could respond. My hands were shaking, but not from sadness anymore. The grief was still there, but it was being overtaken by something else. A cold, clear anger that came from finally seeing the full scope of how I'd been treated. My phone immediately started buzzing with texts. First from Marcus. You're being unfair. We all loved Grandma Rose. Then from my mother. Marcus told me you're upset. This is exactly the kind of behavior we were trying to avoid. I turned off my phone and sat in the silence of my apartment. Outside, Portland was waking up. People heading to work, walking dogs, living their normal lives. But something fundamental had shifted in my world. The family I'd spent years trying to please, trying to reconnect with, trying to prove myself worthy of, they'd never seen me as truly belonging in the first place. What I didn't know yet was that Grandma Rose had seen everything. And she'd made preparations that none of us, especially not my family, could have imagined. The next morning, I did something I hadn't done in 3 years. I called in sick to work. Not because I was physically ill, but because I needed answers. The conversations with Marcus had left me with more questions than clarity, and I couldn't shake the feeling that there were pieces of this puzzle I was missing. Important pieces. I started with Grandma Rose's neighbor, Mrs. Chen, who'd been living next door for 15 years. If anyone knew what had really happened in Rose's final days, it would be her. Mrs. Chen answered on the second ring, her voice immediately softening when she recognized mine. Sarah dear, I was wondering when you'd call. I kept looking for you at the service, but your cousin Derek said you couldn't make it from Portland. Couldn't make it. Not invited, not told, couldn't make it. As if I'd been informed and chosen not to come. Mrs. Chen, I need to ask you something, and I need you to be completely honest with me. Did anyone in my family mention trying to contact me about Grandma Rose's death? There was a pause, the kind that comes when someone realizes they're about to deliver uncomfortable news. Oh, honey, you didn't know, did you? I found out from a LinkedIn post, 3 days after she died. Mrs. Chen's sharp intake of breath told me everything I needed to know about how shocking that sounded to an outsider. Sarah, your grandmother talked about you constantly, especially these last few months. She was so proud of your work with those refugee families. She kept every article that mentioned your organization, had them in a scrapbook on her coffee table. This was news to me. I'd never seen any scrapbook during my visits, and Rose had never mentioned collecting articles about my work. Did she seem worried about anything lately? About the family? Quote. Another pause. She did mention being concerned about some tension. She said there had been words exchanged at Marcus's birthday party, something about your job causing problems. She was upset that Derek had said some unkind things. Marcus's birthday party, the one I hadn't been invited to, held just 6 weeks ago. I'd been told it was just immediate family, but apparently Derek had been there, sharing his opinions about my career. Mrs. Chen, did Grandma Rose leave anything for me? Any message or letter? Well, that's the strange thing. The day before she passed, she asked me to hold on to something for you. Said she had a feeling it might be important someday. My heart stopped. What kind of something? A manila envelope, sealed. She made me promise to only give it to you personally, not to mail it or give it to anyone else in the family. She was very specific about that. I was in my car within 20 minutes driving south toward Bakersfield. The 7-hour drive gave me time to think, and the more I thought, the more questions arose. Why had Rose given Mrs. Chen an envelope for me just before dying? Had she known something was going to happen? Had she anticipated that my family might exclude me? More importantly, what didn't I know about Rose's relationship with my family in her final months? I reached Bakersfield just after sunset and went straight to Mrs. Chen's house. She was waiting for me with tea and sympathy, but more importantly, with the envelope. It was thick, heavier than I'd expected, with my name written in Rose's careful handwriting across the front. For Sarah Campbell, to be opened only by Sarah. Inside, I found 3 items that changed everything I thought I knew about my grandmother's life. The first was a letter, dated just 1 week before her death. My dearest Sarah, if you're reading this, then my suspicions about your family were correct, and they found a way to exclude you even from my death. I've been watching them, listening to their conversations when they think I'm napping or not paying attention. The truth is, they're threatened by who you've become. Your work with refugees has made you inconvenient to their worldview. Your success without their approval has made them uncomfortable. Your independence has shown them that you don't need their validation to build a meaningful life, and that scares them more than they'll ever admit. I want you to know that I see you, Sarah. I see your compassion, your strength, your refusal to compromise your values for the sake of keeping peace. These are not flaws, no matter what they've told you. These are your greatest gifts. I had to stop reading for a moment. Through my tears, I could hear Rose's voice in every word, that mix of gentleness and steel that had always made her advice so powerful. The letter continued. There are things about my life that I never shared with the family, Sarah. Things I kept private because I knew they wouldn't understand or appreciate them. But you will understand, because you've dedicated your life to the same values that have driven mine. Check the second envelope. Inside, you'll find contact information for someone very important to me, someone who has been waiting to meet you. His name is Ambassador Chen Wei-ming, and he's been my pen pal for over 20 years. We met when I was volunteering at the community center, helping newly arrived families learn English. His mother was one of my students. Wei Ming has followed your career through my letters, Sarah. He knows about your work, your dedication, your achievements. Last month, when he was promoted to Prime Minister of Taiwan, one of his first questions was whether you might be interested in consulting on their new refugee integration program. I never mentioned this to you because I wanted to see how far you'd go on your own merit first. But if something happens to me, if you find yourself alone and questioning your worth, I want you to know that there are people on the other side of the world who recognize your value, even if your own family can't see it. My hands were shaking as I opened the second envelope. Inside was a business card for Ambassador Chen Wei-ming, along with a handwritten note. Miss Campbell, your grandmother has spoken of you with such pride and affection over the years. I would be honored to discuss how your expertise might contribute to our humanitarian initiatives. The world needs more people like you. Bulebo WM. The third item was a photocopy of a bank statement, a savings account I'd never known existed, with Rose's name and mine listed as joint account holders. The balance was $47,000. Mrs. Chen watched me process everything, her eyes kind but knowing. She set up that account after your first visit during the pandemic, she said quietly. She told me that you were the only one who came when she was scared and alone, even though it meant risking your own health. She said anyone who would do that deserved to know they'd be taken care of. I stared at the bank statement. Joint account holders. That meant the money was legally mine, regardless of what anyone else in the family thought or wanted. Mrs. Chen, did my family know about any of this? The letters, the account, the ambassador? She shook her head. Rose was very careful about that. She said your mother was the type to interfere if she knew there were opportunities she couldn't control. Your grandmother was protecting your chances, Sarah. As I drove back to Portland that night, envelope secured in my passenger seat, I felt something I hadn't experienced in years when it came to my family situation. I felt powerful. Not because of the money, though that certainly changed things. Not even because of the connection to a foreign prime minister, though I was still processing the implications of that. I felt powerful because for the first time, I had the full truth. Rose had seen everything. She'd watched my family's systematic exclusion of me, their dismissal of my values, their attempts to make me feel small and dramatic for wanting to be included. And instead of confronting them directly, she'd done something much more strategic. She'd built me an exit ramp. More than that, she'd built me a launching pad. While my family was focused on keeping me in my place, Rose had been quietly creating opportunities for me to transcend their limitations entirely. I pulled over at a rest stop and called the number on Ambassador Chen's card. It was morning in Taiwan, and I knew from Rose's letter that he was expecting to hear from me eventually. He answered personally, his English accented but perfect. Ambassador Chen, this is Sarah Campbell, Rose Campbell's granddaughter. Sarah, his voice immediately warmed, I am so deeply sorry for your loss. Your grandmother was an extraordinary woman. She spoke of you with such love and pride. Ambassador, I need to ask you something directly. Were you serious about the consulting opportunity? Absolutely. We are launching a comprehensive refugee integration program next year, and we need someone with your experience and values to help design it. The position would be based in Taipei, with travel throughout Southeast Asia. It's exactly the kind of work your grandmother said you were passionate about. I closed my eyes and felt the last piece of the puzzle click into place. Rose hadn't just left me money and connections. She'd left me a completely different life. One where my values were assets rather than liabilities, where my expertise was sought rather than dismissed. Ambassador Chen, when would you need an answer? There is no rush, Sarah. Grief requires time. But if you are interested, I would be happy to arrange for you to visit Taipei next month to discuss the details in person. After I hung up, I sat in my car in the empty rest stop parking lot and finally allowed myself to cry. Not from sadness, though the grief for Rose was still overwhelming. I cried from relief. My family had excluded me from Rose's funeral because they thought I was inconvenient. What they didn't know was that Rose had been preparing me for a life where their opinions would become completely irrelevant. But I wasn't ready to disappear quietly. First, they were going to learn exactly what they'd lost. 3 days after returning from Bakersfield, I was sitting in my Portland office when my phone rang with an international number. I almost didn't answer, thinking it was a spam call, but something made me pick up. Ms. Campbell? This is Minister Chen Wei-ming's office in Taipei. The minister would like to speak with you personally, if you have a moment. Before I could fully process what was happening, I heard Ambassador Chen's familiar voice. But this time there was something different about it. More formal. More official. Sarah, I hope you don't mind the unexpected call. I have some news that I think will interest you greatly. Of course, Ambassador. What kind of news? Actually, it's Prime Minister Chen now. The transition happened yesterday, sooner than expected due to some political developments. But that's not why I'm calling. Prime Minister, Rose's pen pal friend had just become one of the most powerful people in Asia, and he was calling me personally. Sarah, I've been thinking about our conversation regarding the consulting position. Given the current political climate and our accelerated timeline for the refugee program, I'd like to make you a more substantial offer. We're prepared to create a director position specifically for you, Director of International Humanitarian Integration. It would come with a significant salary, full diplomatic support, and the opportunity to design programs that could help thousands of families. I nearly dropped the phone. Prime Minister, that's incredibly generous, but I have to ask, why me? I mean, I'm honored, but surely there are people with more experience, more credentials. Sarah, your grandmother sent me copies of every report you've written, every program you've developed, every success story from your work in Portland. You've helped over 300 families successfully integrate into American society with a 98% success rate. Those aren't just impressive statistics. They represent real lives transformed. That's exactly the expertise we need. I sat down heavily in my chair. Rose had been documenting my work and sharing it internationally, creating a portfolio I didn't even know existed. There's something else, Prime Minister Chen continued. Your grandmother mentioned in her last letter to me that your family didn't fully appreciate your contributions. She asked me to make sure you knew that the international community recognizes your value, even if your immediate circle doesn't. That sounded exactly like something Rose would do. Even from beyond the grave, she was still advocating for me. Prime Minister, I'm deeply interested, but I need to handle some family matters first. There's been some tension since my grandmother's passing. Of course. Take all the time you need. But Sarah, there's one more thing. I received word this morning that Time magazine wants to do a feature on our new refugee integration initiative. They specifically requested to interview the director we hire, as part of a larger story about innovative humanitarian programs. If you accept the position, you'd be featured as one of their rising global leaders under 40. After I hung up, I sat in stunned silence. In the span of one phone call, I'd gone from being the excluded granddaughter to being offered an international directorship and potential Time magazine feature. The contrast was so stark, it was almost surreal. But that wasn't the end of the surprises. Later that afternoon, I received an email from someone I'd completely forgotten about. Dr. Elizabeth Warren, not the senator, but a professor at UCLA who'd been Rose's doctor during her cancer treatment 5 years earlier. The email was brief but intriguing. Miss Campbell, I was cleaning out old files and found something your grandmother left with me for safekeeping. She said if anything happened to her, I should contact you directly. Are you available to speak? Dr. Warren lived in Los Angeles, just 2 hours from Bakersfield. Something told me this wasn't a coincidence. I called her immediately. Sarah, thank you for getting back to me so quickly. Your grandmother was one of my favorite patients. Not just because she beat cancer, but because of her incredible spirit and wisdom. Dr. Warren, what did she leave with you? Several things, actually. During her treatment, she became concerned about family dynamics. She mentioned that some of her relatives seemed more interested in her finances than her health. She wanted to make sure certain documents were kept safe, away from family members who might misuse them. What kind of documents? Legal papers, mostly, including a revised will that she never filed, because she wanted to see how things played out after her recovery. But there's also something else, a collection of letters and recordings that she made during her treatment. She called it her truth-telling project. My heart began racing. Recordings? Hours of them. She recorded conversations with family members during her illness, times when they thought she was too medicated to understand what they were saying. She also recorded her own reflections about how each family member treated her during her most vulnerable time. This was incredible. Rose had been documenting everything, creating a record of exactly how my family operated when they thought no one was paying attention. Dr. Warren, would it be possible for me to see these documents? That's exactly what your grandmother wanted. She left specific instructions that everything should go to you if the family excluded you from her final arrangements. She said you'd know what to do with the truth. I drove to Los Angeles the next day and met Dr. Warren at her office. She handed me a large manila envelope and a small digital recorder. Start with the will, she suggested. I think you'll find it very different from whatever your family thinks they inherited. The revised will was dated just 6 months ago, long after Rose's recovery. In it, she left the house not to Patricia, as everyone assumed, but to me. Her reasoning was written in her own hand on an attached note. Sarah is the only one who visited during my illness without asking about my will. She's the only one who saw me as a person rather than an inheritance. But the house was just the beginning. Rose had also left me her entire portfolio of investments, stocks, bonds, CDs, that I'd never known existed. The total value was over $180,000. The recordings were even more revealing. I listened to conversations between Rose and my mother where Patricia discussed getting the house ready to sell while Rose was still in treatment. I heard Derek talking to Marcus about splitting up Grandma's stuff before she'd even finished chemotherapy. Most damning was a recording from Marcus's birthday party, the one I hadn't been invited to. I could hear my family discussing me like I was a problem to be solved. Derek's voice, Sarah's getting too political with that refugee job. It's embarrassing when people ask what the family does for work. Patricia's response, we need to start distancing ourselves. I don't want her liberal agenda reflecting on our reputation in the community. Bethany's contribution, maybe we just stop including her in things for a while, see if she gets the message. I had to pause the recording. They hadn't excluded me from recent events by accident or oversight. They'd made a deliberate decision to push me out of the family because my values didn't align with their social image. But Rose's voice came through clearly on the recording. You're all making a terrible mistake. Sarah is the best of this family, and someday you're going to regret treating her this way. The final recording was Rose speaking directly to me, made just 2 weeks before her death. Sarah, if you're hearing this, then they did exactly what I expected them to do. They excluded you from my death the same way they've been excluding you from my life. But here's what they don't know. While they were busy being embarrassed by your success, I was busy being proud of it. I've spent the last year making sure you have everything you need to build a life completely independent of their approval. The money, the house, the international connections, it's all yours. Not because you're my granddaughter, but because you've earned it through your character and your choices. Your family sees your compassion as weakness and your principles as inconvenience. But the rest of the world, including a certain future prime minister in Taiwan, sees them as your greatest strengths. Take what I've left you and build something beautiful, Sarah. Show them what they lost when they decided you weren't worth including. I sat in Dr. Warren's office, surrounded by legal documents and recordings that completely changed my understanding of my family situation. They hadn't just excluded me from a funeral. They'd been systematically pushing me out for years, all while Rose was secretly building me a foundation for an entirely different life. The house alone was worth $400,000 in the current Bakersfield market. Combined with the investments and the joint bank account, Rose had left me nearly $650,000, enough to accept the Taiwan position without any financial stress, enough to build whatever future I wanted. But more than the money, she'd left me proof. Undeniable documentation of exactly who my family really was and exactly how much they'd underestimated both me and Rose. That evening, I called Prime Minister Chen back. Prime Minister, I've made my decision about the position in Taiwan I'd like to accept, with one condition. Of course, Sarah, what do you need? I'd like to delay my start date by 1 month. There are some family matters I need to resolve first, and I want to make sure they understand exactly what they're losing when I leave. Understood completely. Take all the time you need. And Sarah? Your grandmother would be very proud of the choice you're making. As I hung up, I realized that Rose had given me something more valuable than money or career opportunities. She'd given me the power to choose my own story's ending. My family thought they'd successfully marginalized me. They had no idea they were about to learn the difference between being excluded and being liberated. I spent 3 days planning my response with the same methodical precision Rose had used to protect me. This wasn't going to be an emotional confrontation or a dramatic scene. This was going to be a masterclass in strategic communication. My first step was legal. I contacted an estate attorney in Bakersfield and had all of Rose's documents verified and filed properly. The revised will, the joint bank account, the investment portfolio. Everything was legally mine, but I wanted it ironclad before my family found out. The attorney, Janet Morrison, was thorough and efficient. Ms. Campbell, these documents are completely valid. Your grandmother was very smart about how she structured everything. The house deed, in particular, was transferred to joint tenancy with rights of survivorship 2 years ago. It became yours automatically upon her death, regardless of any other will provisions. What does that mean for my family's expectations? It means they have no legal claim to any of these assets. If they've been making plans based on inheriting this property, they're going to be very disappointed. Next, I reached out to my contact at the Portland Tribune, a journalist named Rebecca Hayes, who'd covered several stories about our refugee program. I'd built a good relationship with her over the years, and I knew she'd be interested in what I had to share. Rebecca, I have a story for you, but it's personal this time. It's about family dynamics, inheritance, and what happens when people's true character is revealed in times of crisis. We met at a coffee shop in downtown Portland, where I laid out the entire situation. Rebecca's eyes widened as I played selected portions of Rose's recordings and showed her the documented evidence of my family's systematic exclusion. Sarah, this is incredible, but are you sure you want to go public with this? Once this story is out there, there's no taking it back. I'm not looking for revenge, Rebecca. I'm looking for accountability. My family excluded me from my grandmother's funeral based on their embarrassment about my career values. Now I want people to see what those values have actually led to. I handed her the letter from Prime Minister Chen's office, offering me the director position. The woman they excluded for being, quote, too political with refugee work just got offered a directorship by the Prime Minister of Taiwan. The career they were embarrassed by is now being recognized on an international level. I think people need to understand that sometimes the family member you're quick to dismiss might be the one with the most to offer. Rebecca agreed to write the story, but she suggested we wait until I had more concrete developments to share. If this Taiwan position leads to something even bigger, that would make the contrast even more powerful. I knew exactly what she meant. I called Prime Minister Chen's office and spoke with his chief of staff about accelerating the timeline for my announcement. Ms. Campbell, the Prime Minister has been hoping to finalize this quickly. There's actually a humanitarian summit in San Francisco next week where he'll be speaking. If you're comfortable with it, he'd like to announce your appointment during his keynote address. It would give the program significant international attention. Perfect. I accepted immediately. But I wasn't done setting the stage. I had one more card to play before the public announcement, and it required perfect timing. That Friday evening, I drove to Bakersfield and let myself into Rose's house using the key she'd given me years ago. The house felt empty but peaceful, exactly as she'd left it. I spent an hour just sitting in her living room, surrounded by her things, preparing for what I was about to do. At exactly 6 p.m., I sent identical text messages to Patricia, Marcus, Bethany, and Derek. I need to discuss Rose's estate with all of you. Can you meet me at her house tomorrow at 2 p.m.? There are some things you need to know. The responses came quickly. Patricia, what things? I've already handled the estate arrangements. Marcus, is this about money? Because we already discussed this. Derek, I hope you're not planning to cause problems. Bethany, can't we just let Grandma rest in peace? I replied to all of them with one message. Just be there at 2 p.m. You'll understand everything then. Saturday afternoon, they arrived within minutes of each other, clearly having coordinated their approach. They walked into Rose's living room like they owned the place, which made what I was about to tell them even more satisfying. I'd arranged 4 chairs facing the couch where I sat, Rose's revised will and legal documents spread on the coffee table in front of me. Patricia took charge immediately, as always. Sarah, we appreciate that you're grieving, but we've already handled all of Rose's affairs. If you're hoping for some kind of inheritance, I'm afraid she left everything to the family collectively. Actually, Mom, that's not quite accurate. I picked up the revised will. Rose updated her will 6 months ago. This document, properly witnessed and notarized, supersedes anything you might have found. I watched their faces change as I read the key provisions aloud. The house to me, the investments to me, even her car and personal belongings to me. The only thing left to the rest of the family was her furniture and some small sentimental items. Derek was the first to explode. That's impossible. She wouldn't have done that. You manipulated her, didn't you? You influenced her when she was sick. I pressed play on Rose's digital recorder. Her voice filled the room, clear and strong. I am making these changes to my will because I've observed how my family treats me when they think I'm not paying attention. I've listened to them discuss my death as if it were a business opportunity rather than a loss. Only Sarah has visited me, cared for me, and shown me genuine love without asking what she might inherit in return. The room fell silent. Marcus looked stunned. Bethany had tears in her eyes, but not from sadness, from anger. This isn't fair, Bethany said. We all loved Grandma Rose. We all cared about her. I played another recording, this one from Marcus's birthday party, where they discussed excluding me from family events because of my political career. You excluded me from her funeral, I said quietly. You made a conscious decision that I wasn't family enough to say goodbye to the woman who raised me. Now you want to talk about what's fair? Patricia had been unusually quiet, but now she stood up, her face flushed with anger. Fine. You got the house and the money. Are you happy now? Is this what you wanted? To tear the family apart over money? This isn't about money, Mom. This is about respect. This is about the fact that you all decided I was an embarrassment, because my career doesn't fit your social image. Well, I have some news for you about that embarrassing career. I handed them printouts of the news articles about Prime Minister Chen's election, highlighted sections about Taiwan's new humanitarian initiatives, and the letter offering me the director position. The political refugee work you were so embarrassed by, it just earned me a directorship with the government of Taiwan. The Prime Minister himself recruited me based on my expertise. On Monday, he's announcing my appointment at an international humanitarian summit in San Francisco. I could see them processing this information, trying to reconcile their image of me as the family disappointment with this new reality. There's more, I continued. Time magazine wants to interview me as part of their Rising Global Leaders Under 40 Feet feature. The career you thought was holding the family back is now getting international recognition. Derek shook his head. This is all just coincidence. Just because some foreign politician offered you a job doesn't mean... It's not a coincidence, Derek. It's 20 years of Rose, building relationships, and documenting my work. While you were all busy being embarrassed by me, she was proud of me, proud enough to share my achievements with world leaders. I stood up and walked to Rose's bookshelf, pulling out the scrapbook Mrs. Chen had mentioned. Page after page of articles about our refugee program, photos of families I'd helped, letters of gratitude translated into multiple languages. She kept every success story. Every time we helped a family find housing, every time we got someone enrolled in English classes, every time we helped a refugee start a business, Rose documented all of it. She saw the value in what I was doing, even when my own family couldn't. The room was completely silent now. I could see them realizing that they'd fundamentally misunderstood both Rose and me. Here's what's going to happen, I said, gathering up the legal documents. I'm moving to Taiwan to take this position. This house will be sold, and I'll use the proceeds to fund scholarship programs for refugee families, something Rose and I discussed many times. The investment portfolio will support my transition to international work. I paused at the door and turned back to face them. You excluded me from Rose's funeral because you thought I was an inconvenience to your family image. But Rose saw what you couldn't see, that the values you were embarrassed by were actually my greatest assets. Now the whole world is going to see what she saw. I walked out of that house for the last time, leaving them sitting among Rose's things, finally understanding what they'd lost when they decided I wasn't worth including. Monday's announcement was going to make that loss very public. The Fairmont Hotel in San Francisco buzzed with the energy of international diplomacy. 300 humanitarian leaders, government officials, and journalists filled the grand ballroom for the Pacific Rim Humanitarian Summit. I sat in the front row, wearing the navy blue suit I bought specifically for this moment, professional, confident, and completely different from the grieving granddaughter my family had dismissed just 2 weeks earlier. Prime Minister Chen took the stage to thunderous applause. His presence commanded the room in a way that reminded me why Rose had been so impressed by his character all those years ago. As he began his keynote address about Taiwan's commitment to refugee assistance, I felt my phone buzzing incessantly in my purse. 12 missed calls from Patricia, 6 from Marcus, and a string of increasingly frantic texts. Before I discuss our new initiatives, Prime Minister Chen announced, his voice carrying clearly through the ballroom sound system, I want to introduce someone who embodies the best of humanitarian leadership. Someone whose innovative approach to refugee integration has achieved remarkable success rates that most programs can only dream of. The audience stirred with interest. Several journalists in the media section pulled out their phones, sensing a significant announcement. Ms. Sarah Campbell has transformed the lives of over 300 refugee families in Portland, Oregon, with a success rate that has caught international attention. Her work demonstrates that effective integration programs require more than good intentions. They require expertise, cultural sensitivity, and unwavering commitment to human dignity. My heart pounded as cameras turned toward me. This was really happening. The granddaughter who'd been excluded from her own grandmother's funeral was being recognized on an international stage. Today, I'm honored to announce that Ms. Campbell has accepted the position of Director of International Humanitarian Integration for Taiwan. She will lead our efforts to create the most comprehensive refugee assistance program in Southeast Asia. The applause was overwhelming. I stood and nodded graciously, aware that somewhere in Bakersfield my family was probably watching this live stream, and finally understanding the magnitude of what they'd dismissed. Prime Minister Chen continued, Ms. Campbell's appointment represents Taiwan's commitment to evidence-based humanitarian work. Her programs don't just help refugees survive, they help them thrive. This is exactly the leadership we need as we face the growing global displacement crisis. After his speech, the media attention was immediate and intense. Rebecca Hayes from the Portland Tribune was there, having flown down to cover the story she'd been preparing. But she wasn't alone. Journalists from the New York Times, Washington Post, and BBC all wanted interviews with the American aid worker who'd caught the attention of Taiwan's new prime minister. During the press conference, a reporter from the LA Times asked the question I'd been waiting for. Ms. Campbell, this seems like a dramatic career leap. What prepared you for this level of international responsibility? My preparation came from 20 years of learning about service and sacrifice from my grandmother, Rose Campbell. She taught me that true humanitarian work isn't about grand gestures. It's about consistent, daily choices to see people's humanity before their circumstances. I paused, thinking of Rose's voice on those recordings, her pride in my work when my own family couldn't see its value. My grandmother passed away recently, and her final advice to me was to never compromise my values for the sake of others' comfort. She believed that the work we do with refugee families isn't political. It's simply human. This appointment is as much a tribute to her wisdom as it is recognition of our program's success. The questions continued for 30 minutes. Each answer reinforced the same theme. The values my family had been embarrassed by were exactly what had earned international recognition. As the press conference ended, my phone showed 47 missed calls and 62 text messages. The story was already going viral on social media. #RefugeeWorkMatters was trending, along with photos of me with Prime Minister Chen and quotes from my interview. But the message that caught my attention wasn't from my family. It was from Dr. Amanda Martinez, Director of Refugee Services for the United Nations. Sarah, saw your appointment announcement. We've been following your Portland program for 2 years. Would you be interested in consulting on our global integration standards? Your success metrics are exactly what we need to scale worldwide. The UN. Before I could fully process this, another message arrived. This one, from Senator Patty Murray's office. Ms. Campbell, the senator would like to discuss incorporating your integration model into federal refugee policy. Are you available for a call this week? I sat in the hotel lobby, scrolling through messages from organizations I'd only dreamed of working with. The European Union's Migration Office, Canada's Immigration Department, the International Committee of the Red Cross. Each message represented opportunities that my family's narrow worldview could never have imagined. Finally, I opened the messages from home. Patricia's texts had evolved from confusion to panic. Call me immediately. We need to understand what's happening. Sarah, people are asking us about you. What are we supposed to say? This is getting out of hand. We need to talk as a family. Marcus had sent a link to the Portland Tribune article Rebecca had rushed to publish. Local aid worker rises to international prominence after family exclusion. The headline made me wince. I hadn't wanted it to be quite so direct about the family situation. But Derek's message was the most telling. Sarah, I think there's been a misunderstanding. We never meant to exclude you from anything important. Can we meet and work this out? A misunderstanding. Even now, faced with undeniable evidence of my success and their misjudgment, they were trying to reframe their conscious exclusion as an accident. My phone rang. Rebecca Hayes. Sarah, I'm getting calls from major networks. CNN wants to do a feature story. The Today Show is interested in an interview. This story is resonating with people because everyone has family members who've underestimated them. Rebecca, I appreciate the media interest, but I don't want this to become purely about family drama. The real story should be about the refugee families we serve. I understand, but Sarah, your story is connecting with people precisely because it shows how personal values translate into professional success. People need to see that the family member others dismiss might be the one changing the world. That evening, alone in my San Francisco hotel room, I finally called Mrs. Chen in Bakersfield. Sarah, dear, I've been watching the news all day. Rose would be so proud. She always said you were destined for something special. Mrs. Chen, do you think I'm handling this the right way? Part of me feels guilty about how public this has become. Honey, your grandmother spent 2 years documenting your family's treatment of you. She didn't do that so you could hide their behavior. She did it so you'd have the strength to show the world who you really are. Mrs. Chen was right. Rose hadn't just protected me from my family's limitations, she'd prepared me to transcend them entirely. Tomorrow, I would fly back to Portland to resign from my current position and prepare for Taiwan. But first I had one more call to make. The number I dialed belonged to my family, all of them, on the conference call Patricia had demanded. It was time for the final conversation. The conference call connected at exactly 8 p.m. Pacific time. I could hear the tension in the silence before anyone spoke. 4 people who had underestimated me so completely were now forced to confront the reality of who I'd become. Patricia broke the silence first, her real estate agent voice struggling to maintain its usual authority. Sarah, we need to discuss how to handle this media attention. It's affecting our reputation in the community. Your reputation? I almost laughed. Mom, I just became the youngest director in Taiwan's government history, and you're worried about your reputation? People are asking questions. Marcus jumped in. The Tribune article made it sound like we deliberately excluded you from important family events. You did deliberately exclude me. I have Rose's recordings of you planning it. Those recordings were taken without our consent, Derek interjected, his voice carrying that familiar edge of entitlement. They might not even be legal. Derek, Rose was recording conversations in her own home about her own life. Everything on those recordings is completely legal. More importantly, everything about them is true. I heard Bethany sigh heavily. Sarah, can't we just move past this? Grandma Rose is gone, you got what you wanted from her estate, and now you have this fancy job. Why can't we just be a family again? The simplicity of her question revealed everything wrong with their thinking. They still didn't understand that this had never been about money or career advancement. It had been about basic respect and inclusion. Bethany, let me ask you something. When you planned your wedding, did you think about which family members to invite? Of course. When you make holiday plans, do you consider who should be included? Yes, but when Grandma Rose was dying, Did it occur to anyone in this call to pick up the phone and tell me? The silence stretched uncomfortably long. That's the difference between us, I continued. You think this is about the estate or the job opportunity, but this is about the fact that when our grandmother was dying, you made a conscious choice that I didn't matter enough to know. Patricia's voice hardened. We've already explained the circumstances. Everything happened very quickly. Mom, I've heard Rose's recordings. I know you started planning her funeral arrangements while she was still alive. I know Derek suggested excluding me because my job was, quote, politically embarrassing. I know Marcus agreed because I'd become distant. You had plenty of time to call me. You chose not to. Fine, Derek snapped. Maybe we made a mistake. But look how you're handling it. Airing our family business in the media, making us look like monsters. This isn't how mature adults resolve conflicts. You're right, Derek. Mature adults communicate directly with family members when important things happen. They don't exclude people and then act surprised when there are consequences. Marcus tried a different approach. Sarah, we get that you're angry, but now that everything's out in the open, can't we work on rebuilding our relationships? You're going to be in Taiwan, far away from all this drama. That's exactly the point, Marcus. I am going to be far away. Far enough that your opinions about my career won't matter. Far enough that your embarrassment about my values won't affect me. Far enough that I'll never again have to wonder if I'm family enough to be included in important moments. So that's it, Bethany's voice cracked slightly. You're just going to disappear and never speak to us again? For the first time in the conversation, I felt a flicker of sadness rather than anger. Despite everything, these were still the people I'd grown up with, the family I'd once desperately wanted to belong to. Bethany, I'm not disappearing. I'm choosing a life where my values are appreciated rather than tolerated. Where my work is seen as meaningful rather than embarrassing. Where I don't have to prove I'm worthy of basic consideration. But we're still family, Patricia said, and for once her voice sounded uncertain rather than commanding. Family isn't just blood, Mom. It's showing up for each other. It's caring about each other's lives. It's making space for each other's dreams, even when you don't understand them. Rose understood that. She showed up for me in ways you never did. I paused, looking out at the San Francisco skyline, knowing this would be the last conversation I'd have with all of them together. Rose left me more than money and connections. She left me proof that I was never the problem, that my values weren't flaws to be hidden but strengths to be celebrated. She saw what you couldn't see. That the granddaughter you were embarrassed by was actually the one most likely to make a difference in the world. Sarah, Marcus said quietly, what do you want from us? It was the first time any of them had asked what I needed rather than defending what they'd done. I want you to understand that actions have consequences. You excluded me when I needed family most, and now I'm building a life where that exclusion doesn't matter. I want you to remember this, the next time you decide someone's values are inconvenient to your image. I took a deep breath, feeling Rose's presence in the words I spoke next. Most of all, I want you to know that the next time you see my name in the news, when the Time article comes out, when the UN announces our collaboration, when other governments adopt programs based on my work, I want you to remember that you had the chance to be proud of me, and you chose to be embarrassed instead. The silence that followed felt final. I'm hanging up now. I have a plane to catch tomorrow and a life to build on the other side of the world. A life where people see my compassion as strength, not weakness. Where my principles are assets, not liabilities. Sarah, wait, Patricia started. Goodbye, Mom. Take care of each other. And maybe next time, take care of each other better. I ended the call and immediately blocked all their numbers. 6 months later, sitting in my Taipei office overlooking the city skyline, I received a package with no return address. Inside was a newspaper clipping from the Bakersfield Californian with a photo of my family at a community fundraiser. The headline read, Local Family Proud of Daughter's International Humanitarian Work. I smiled and filed it away. Some stories have endings that come full circle. Others have endings that move forward in completely new directions. Mine was definitely the latter. And Rose would have been proud of that choice. Looking for more? We've got 2 amazing stories ready for you right on screen. If this one touched you, these are absolutely worth your time. Click to watch them now. And hey, Subscribe and hit that bell to never miss our latest uploads.